It begins like any ordinary day, until it spirals into chaos. A black woman steps into a courtroom, composed, silent, blending into the crowd. But when a crooked cop singles her out, aiming to shame her before all, he's clueless about the storm he's unleashed. He's just provoked the one woman with the strength to shatter his entire career. What happens next isn't merely a showdown between two souls. It's a fierce battle between truth and the deceit that shields the powerful. And just when you think you've cracked the plot, she turns the tables. Stick around, because this tale doesn't just curve, it explodes. Drop a comment and tell us where you're tuning in from. We're always scrolling through your thoughts.
Manhattan's skyline towered over the courthouse, a brooding titan slicing through the grim gray clouds. Elizabeth Harper pulled her coat tight against the biting cold, her heels tapping softly on the stone steps. She carried herself with poised elegance, forged from years of holding steady while the world tried to break her spirit. At 54, her gaze burned with the intensity of youth. Navigating bias and red tape had taught her to stand tall and stay vigilant. Today was no exception. Clad in simple attire, dark pants, a modest blouse, and a no-nonsense coat, she looked like just another spectator at the hearing. But Elizabeth was anything but typical. She was the newly minted director of internal affairs for the NYPD, a role she'd clawed her way into with tenacity, brilliance, and defiance. Yet she'd kept her rise under wraps, sharing it only with those who had to know. She had her reasons for staying low-key, and today her plan would face its ultimate trial. The courthouse hummed with its usual morning frenzy. Attorneys huddled over last-second edits, clerks sifted through stacks of files, and cops loitered in corners, sizing up anyone who seemed out of place. Elizabeth knew this scene all too well. She breezed through the metal detectors, brushing off the wary glares from guards who treated her like an annoyance. Same old story. The air inside was heavy, as if the walls had soaked up decades of courtroom drama. It reeked of sweat, cheap aftershave, and musty documents. Elizabeth slipped into a back row seat in the courtroom gallery, her eyes sweeping the space, noting every face. Today's hearing was meant to be standard, a routine police misconduct case where the department would toss out hollow apologies and vague reform pledges. But Elizabeth wasn't here for lip service. She was here to watch, to arm herself with intel, to confirm the doubts she'd been nursing for months. Sergeant Michael Sullivan was set to take the stand, a cop whose name had been murmured in dark corners for years. He was one of those golden boys, convinced his connections made him bulletproof. Sullivan embodied everything Elizabeth loathed about the system: cocky, corrupt, and cloaked in privilege. For months, she'd been piecing together evidence, buried reports, ignored complaints, cases swept aside without a glance. Today, she was primed to bring him down. The door swung open, and Sullivan strode in, radiating the swagger of a man who'd never faced consequences. Tall and broad, he moved like he owned the place. His uniform gleamed, brass sparkling. But Elizabeth saw past the polish. To her, he was just a wolf in a badge. His eyes scanned the room, a smug grin flickering on his face. When they landed on Elizabeth, he brushed her off with a fleeting look before turning to the front. Just another black woman in the crowd, another face to dismiss. But Elizabeth wasn't here to fade away. She was here to make him pay. The hearing kicked off, the judge's voice droning through the opening rituals. Sullivan's arrogance oozed from every pore. His answers to the prosecutor's questions were clipped, dripping with disdain, as if the whole ordeal was beneath him. Elizabeth's eyes stayed locked on him, cataloging every twitch, every smug smirk. She knew his kind, bullies who fed on control and fear. But she wasn't scared. She was here to see him crumble. During a short break, Sullivan's gaze drifted back to her. This time, there was a flicker of irritation, maybe even suspicion. She dared to meet his stare head-on, refusing to look away like others did under his glare. He marched over, his boots pounding the polished floor, his face twisted with barely veiled scorn. "Ma'am, I don't know who you think you are, but you're out of your league," he sneered. "This isn't a town hall for stirring up trouble. This is a courthouse. You don't fit here." Elizabeth held his gaze, unflinching. "I've got every right to be here." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "You speak when I say so, and you definitely don't talk to me." He expected her to cower, like most did. But Elizabeth stood firm, her voice cool and even. "I'm here on official business." Sullivan let out a harsh laugh. "Official business? You look like nothing but trouble." She stayed silent, her eyes boring into his. She'd faced men like him her whole life, tyrants who wielded authority like a club. But today, Sullivan would learn not everyone bends to his bluster. He leaned closer, his voice a low growl. "Keep your mouth shut and stay out of things you can't handle," he warned. "It'll be safer for you." A faint smile tugged at Elizabeth's lips. "I know more than you think." As Sullivan stormed off, Elizabeth's fingers gripped the bench's edge. This was just the opening act. The courtroom reconvened, but she could feel Sullivan's glare searing into her from across the room. She sat rigid, her face a mask of calm, a skill she'd perfected over years. If Sullivan thought he could shake her, he'd need to bring more than that. From her seat, Elizabeth kept her focus on the proceedings, her fingers drumming a slow beat on her thigh. She watched Sullivan strut to the witness stand, his smug grin plastered on. He fielded questions with the ease of a man who thought himself untouchable. It was the same arrogance she'd battled her entire career. Men who wore power like a crown, daring anyone to knock it off. But Elizabeth had spent her life toppling men like him. And this time, she wouldn't just push back, she'd obliterate him. The prosecutor's questions cut sharp, but Sullivan sidestepped them with slick precision. His tone was smooth, smug, as if he were indulging a pointless game. "Sergeant Sullivan," the prosecutor pressed, her voice steady but tinged with exasperation. "Is it true that Officer Rodriguez lodged a formal complaint against you for excessive force in the Thompson raid?" Sullivan shrugged, nonchalant. "Sure, Rodriguez made that claim, but it was deemed baseless. It was a high-stakes operation. Tough calls had to be made fast. She couldn't handle what needed doing." "Not my problem." Elizabeth's jaw clenched. She knew Sullivan's type. Men who saw violence as a medal, who spun lies to fit their story. But truth has a way of clawing to the surface, and Elizabeth was ready to dig until every dirty secret was exposed. As the questioning dragged on, Elizabeth's gaze swept the room. She noted how Sullivan's peers watched him, some with awe, others with unease. She couldn't tell which. But one thing was clear. Power like his didn't grow alone. It thrived on webs of loyalty, on those who turned a blind eye for their own gain. Sullivan's voice snapped her back. "I've been a cop for over 20 years. I do my job better than most. Things get messy. You make hard calls. Some rookies can't stomach it, but that's their issue, not mine." His bravado was thick, but Elizabeth caught the tremor beneath it. Sullivan was rattled, his cool fraying with each probing question. He knew eyes were on him, but his ego wouldn't let him stop. The prosecutor kept at it, her grit impressive but futile. Sullivan deflected with the finesse of a seasoned liar, smirking as the questions grew thornier, his posture screaming invincibility. Elizabeth's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. Nothing trumped watching Sullivan's every move, each sneer, each casual wave off, each lie. It was all fuel for her fire. She felt the weight of the USB drive in her coat, packed with damning files she'd spent months collecting. Buried complaints, tampered evidence, silenced witnesses. She had it all. And today, she'd make sure the world saw it too. The courtroom grew tense, the air thick with unease. Spectators shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Sullivan and the prosecutor. Even the judge seemed irked by Sullivan's flippant attitude. Elizabeth watched him lean back, arms crossed, his smirk bolder by the second. He relished the spotlight, the power to brush off others with a glance or a word. But he'd miscalculated. He'd underestimated her, and by the time he realized it, he'd be done. During a pause, Sullivan's eyes flicked back to Elizabeth. This time, he didn't hide his annoyance, his lips curling into a sneer. "Still here?" he muttered, just for her. "I told you to keep quiet and stay out of things you don't get." Elizabeth met his stare with icy calm. "I'm here to see justice done. Whether you grasp, that is your problem." His sneer deepened. "Justice? That's a laugh. People like you don't get what it takes to keep this city safe. You think a desk job makes you my judge?" "The evidence will tell its own story," Elizabeth said, her voice unshaken. He leaned closer, his face twisting with malice. "You'll regret poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Keep it up, and you'll wish you hadn't." Elizabeth didn't blink. She'd faced worse threats than Sullivan's. "Save your scare tactics for someone who cares. They don't faze me." His eyes blazed with rage, but she saw a flicker of doubt. For the first time, Sullivan looked shaken. He stormed off without another word, his boots echoing in the hush. Elizabeth watched him go, her fingers tapping her thigh again. She had him cornered. She knew it. His fury, his venom. It all proved he was trapped. And she was ready to push until he broke. This wasn't just about exposing Sullivan's rot. It was about tearing down the network that let him flourish, and Elizabeth would stop at nothing to finish the job. The hearing resumed, but her mind was already mapping her next move. She wasn't here to follow Sullivan's rules. She was here to smash them. And by day's end, everyone would know who they were up against. Sullivan's anger smoldered long after he left the courtroom. His cocky mask was cracking, and Elizabeth could see it. She leaned back, calm as ever, watching the drama unfold. The prosecutor was visibly frayed, her questions sharper, her patience thinning as Sullivan dodged and spun every accusation. But Elizabeth was fine with it. She wanted him cornered, riled, reckless. Men like him slipped when their pride took a hit, and he was playing right into her hands. Sullivan took the stand again, jaw tight, neck muscles straining under his crisp uniform. His eyes kept darting to Elizabeth, betraying the irritation she sparked. It was almost comical how fast his bravado had crumbled. He was spooked, no question. Exactly what she'd planned. The prosecutor fired another question, this time about his disciplinary record. His reply was textbook deflection. "Disciplinary record? Sure, I've had complaints. Find me a cop with 20 years on the job and no gripes, and I'll show you a fraud. The difference is, I get results. Sometimes that means stepping on toes. People whine when you do it right." He spat the words with the air of a man above reproach. Elizabeth's lips curved into a faint smile. He was burying himself deeper. "Sergeant Sullivan, do you tend to use excessive force in your operations?" The prosecutor pushed, her voice steady, eyes glinting with resolve. Sullivan scoffed. "Excessive force? This is New York. We're up against gangs, dealers, and lowlifes daily. Hesitate, and you're dead. So yeah, maybe I hit harder than some paper pusher would like. That's why I'm still standing. I don't hold back." The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. "So you're admitting to using more force than needed?" "I'm admitting I do what's necessary," Sullivan growled. "You don't get it. You're not out there. You sit in cushy offices, judging us by reports and numbers. On the streets, you learn fast. Pause, and you're done. His arrogance was suffocating. Elizabeth felt the room's tension spike, the prosecutor's frustration boiling as Sullivan dodged accountability. The judge looked annoyed, his fingers drumming an irritated beat on the bench. Elizabeth stayed cool, her focus unwavering. She wasn't here to bicker or prove Sullivan's guilt with words. She was here to set the stage, let him expose himself, and he was doing it spectacularly. Sullivan's eyes kept flicking to her, narrowing each time he caught her stare. Her presence alone seemed to taunt him, a challenge he couldn't ignore. Good, Elizabeth thought. Let him feel the heat. Let him feel hunted. During another break, Sullivan stormed out, fists balled at his sides. Elizabeth followed at a leisurely pace, keeping her distance as she trailed him down the hall. He spun around a corner and froze, his shoulders stiff. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked, his voice bouncing off the walls. Elizabeth didn't falter, approaching with her usual calm, eyes locked on his. "I'm watching." "You're harassing," Sullivan snarled, his fists whitening. "You think you can strut in here and mess with me? You don't know who I am." "Oh, I know exactly who you are," Elizabeth said smoothly. "I've spent months studying you, Sullivan. Every complaint, every shred of evidence buried to protect you. You think you're untouchable, but everyone screws up. And you've got a long list." He glared, eyes blazing with fury. "You think you're clever, playing cop? This isn't your game, lady. You're in over your head." "Am I?" Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "Or are you just now seeing your time's running out?" Sullivan stepped closer, his voice a venomous hiss. "You don't know who you're messing with. I could crush you. I've done it before, and I'll do it again." Her smile was ice cold. "I'm sure you've buried plenty, hidden plenty. But unlike them, I'm not scared of you. And I've got everything to make the truth burn bright." He stared, searching for a crack in her armor. She gave him none. She'd faced worse than Sullivan could dream up, and she wasn't backing down. "Stay out of my way," he spat, "or you'll regret it." Elizabeth met his glare with steely calm. "My only regret is not exposing you sooner. But don't worry, Sullivan. That's about to change." She turned and walked away, her steps echoing as his rage seemed to pulse through the walls. She didn't care. She'd baited the trap, and soon he'd tumble in. The rest of the day's proceedings blurred by. Elizabeth stayed in the gallery, her eyes on Sullivan whenever he testified. His behavior grew erratic, his answers sharp with anger. He was unraveling, and the room could feel it. When the hearing wrapped for the day, Elizabeth stood and headed for the exit, sensing Sullivan's stare but not glancing back. He was spiraling, his arrogance buckling under paranoia, and she was ready to deliver the final blow. The night was bitter, a sharp wind cutting through New York's empty streets as Elizabeth drove. The city's lights flickered like wary eyes, dimmed by looming clouds. Her hands gripped the wheel, her mind racing over the day's events. Sullivan's bravado had been electric, his anger a gift she'd gladly stoked. He was a bully, drunk on power and fear. But fear could be flipped, and Sullivan was tasting it now. She pulled into her driveway, her modest home a quiet haven at the block's end. It wasn't grand, but it was hers, a sanctuary she'd built where no one could say she didn't belong. She stepped out, the cold stinging her skin as she climbed the steps and unlocked the door. The house was dark, its silence familiar. Elizabeth tossed her keys on the table and sank into a chair at the kitchen counter. Her phone buzzed, and she checked it. A message from David, a trusted ex-cop turned PI with connections she couldn't match. "Got something big. Evidence file coming. Stay sharp. This one's hot. Her fingers shook as she opened the file, her pulse racing as she scanned the pages. Photos, emails, witness statements coerced into silence. It was a gold mine, all pointing at Sullivan. But it wasn't just him. It was the names. Officers who'd shielded him, buried complaints, faked reports. People who'd propped up the rot for years. She leaned back, staring at the screen. Taking Sullivan down wasn't enough. She had to dismantle his whole network. And she would. She had the tools. Elizabeth typed a quick reply to David. "This is gold. I owe you. Stay safe." His response was instant. "These guys fight dirty, and Sullivan's rattled. You shook him today. Brace for his pushback." She smirked, grim but ready. She'd been prepping for this fight for years, building her case brick by brick. Sullivan thought he was a fortress, but she'd already started the demolition. Tonight, she'd bring it all down. She spent the night diving into the files, linking names, dates, and crimes into a damning web. It was grueling, but she thrived on it. Each discovery sharpened her path. Dawn came too soon, pale light creeping through the curtains as she shut her laptop. Her eyes stung, but her mind was razor sharp. She had what she needed to crush Sullivan. Now, she'd hit him where it hurt most. As she got ready for another courthouse day, her phone buzzed again. A text from Emily, a young officer and rare ally who fed her intel when she could. "Sullivan's digging into you, asking about your past. Watch out." Elizabeth's lips tightened. Of course he'd try to flip the script. Men like him always attacked those who threatened their throne. But she was ready, had been for years. She reached the courthouse early, striding through the packed halls with confidence. The hearing was an hour away, but she had other moves to make. She found Emily by a back entrance, her face tense. "Elizabeth," Emily whispered, glancing around. "I shouldn't be here. Sullivan's grilling everyone about you, trying to figure out your play." "He's scared," Elizabeth said calmly. "He's losing his grip, and desperate men slip up." "Maybe. But he's got eyes on you. Not just his usual buddies. I overheard him with internal affairs guys. They're plotting something to trap you." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. Internal affairs? Names. Richards and Malone. They're Sullivan's guys, always have been. Whatever they're cooking, it's bad. Her jaw tightened. She'd known Sullivan had allies, but this was bold. If they'd weaponize internal affairs against her, the corruption was deeper than she'd thought. "Thanks, Emily. Keep listening. If you hear more, tell me." Emily nodded, eyes darting nervously. "Just be careful. Sullivan's dangerous, and he's not alone." Elizabeth's smile was fierce. "I'm not scared of Sullivan or his goons. They can try to bury me, but I'll go down swinging." Emily hesitated, worry clear on her face. "Don't underestimate him. He's got people everywhere, and if he's backed into a corner—" "Good," Elizabeth cut in, voice firm. "Let him squirm. It's time someone made him sweat." Emily nodded and slipped into the crowd, shoulders hunched. Elizabeth watched her go, her mind racing. Sullivan was trying to scare her, digging for dirt to discredit her, but he'd find nothing. She'd made sure of that. But internal affairs gunning for her was a curveball. It meant Sullivan was more desperate than she'd guessed, and desperate men were wild cards. She gripped her files tighter. No matter how many came for her, no matter how deep the rot ran, she'd expose it all. And when she did, Sullivan would have nowhere to hide. The courthouse felt charged that morning, a heavy tension in every breath. The halls buzzed with lawyers, witnesses, and cops, but their usual hustle was subdued, replaced by cautious glances and low murmurs. Elizabeth felt eyes on her, Sullivan's crew, no doubt, trying to unnerve her. But she didn't waver. She'd faced worse than his lackeys: racism, sexism, a system rigged to shut her out. She'd fought her way to the top with grit and fire, and now, in the courthouse where she'd topple Sullivan, her resolve was iron. Her phone buzzed in her coat. Miss Appid undefined. Seeing David's name, she slipped into a quiet nook to answer. "David, what's up?" she asked, voice hushed. "You're being framed," he said. Words rushed. "I've been digging into Sullivan's network, tracking his next move. He's not just asking about you, he's faking evidence." Her pulse spiked, but her voice stayed steady. "What kind? Corruption? Screw-ups? Anything to paint you as the problem. He's got internal affairs pals, Richards and Malone, forging papers to make you look dirty." Her jaw clenched. She'd expected a fight, but this was brazen. "Got proof?" "Working on it. These guys are slick, covering their tracks. Be careful, Elizabeth. If this hits before you drop your evidence, you'll be the one in the hot seat." She shut her eyes, absorbing David's warning. She'd always known Sullivan was ruthless, but this was next-level panic, and panic made men deadly. "Keep digging," she said, voice like steel. "I need everything, and it better be bulletproof. If Sullivan wants to play dirty, I'll show him how spotless my record is." "Got it. Watch your back. They're not messing around, and Sullivan's livid. You got under his skin yesterday, and guys like him don't take that lightly." "I know," she said, "but I'm not done yet." She hung up, pocketed her phone, and clenched her fists. Sullivan was gunning for her, trying to torch her legacy, smear her name before she could expose him. But she'd seen it coming, prepared for it. And with David's warning fresh, she was more driven than ever. The hearing resumed that morning, the courtroom electric with tension as Sullivan took the stand again. His smugness was back, fueled by whatever plot he and his cronies were hatching. Elizabeth watched him with cold precision, her face unreadable. Sullivan spoke with his usual bravado, his voice thick with condescension as he fielded questions. He played the victim now, spinning a tale of a misunderstood hero. "People like her," he said, nodding toward Elizabeth. "Don't get what it's like out there. They don't feel the heat we're under. They think they can waltz in, point fingers, and ruin good cops, but they're clueless about the real world." Elizabeth's lips twitched into a faint smile. Sullivan was overreaching, his ego blinding him. He was trying to win the room, cast her as the outsider. But she'd seen this move coming and came armed. When the prosecutor wrapped up, Sullivan shot Elizabeth a smug sneer, the look of a man who thought he'd already won. She met his gaze, her expression stone cold. At the lunch break, Elizabeth headed to a reserved conference room, locking the door behind her. She fired up her laptop, diving into months of evidence against Sullivan, a case so tight even his allies couldn't save him. Officer complaints, victim testimonies, recordings of Sullivan bragging about dodging consequences. With David's warning in mind, she double-checked every detail, her fingers racing over the keys. No room for error. Not now. Not when she was this close. A knock jolted her. She tensed, rising to crack the door. Emily stood there, pale and shaken. "Elizabeth," she whispered, voice trembling. "They're after you. Sullivan's filed a complaint, accusing you of misconduct, power abuse, everything." A cold rage flared in Elizabeth's chest. "What's he claiming?" "Everything," Emily said, voice breaking. "Evidence tampering, witness intimidation, even stealing funds. They're trying to bury you, and they've got papers to back it." Elizabeth's eyes flashed, but her voice stayed calm. "I see. You here to warn me, or are you in on it?" Emily's eyes widened, panic clear. "No, I swear. I just overheard them. They're submitting it tomorrow. They want you gone before you can testify against Sullivan." Elizabeth nodded slowly. She'd expected a stunt, but the scale was staggering. He was trying to ruin her before she could take the stand. "Thanks for the heads up," she said. "Stay out of it now. This is my battle." Emily looked ready to protest but nodded and hurried off, her steps echoing. Elizabeth shut the door, leaning against it, her mind racing. Sullivan was striking hard, and if she didn't move fast, her work could collapse. But she wouldn't let that happen. She had her own moves, and she'd play them hard. The storm hit quicker than Elizabeth expected. The next morning, as the courthouse lobby filled with its usual crowd, the rumor spread like wildfire. Elizabeth Harper was under internal review. Before she reached the courtroom, a plain manila envelope slid under her office door. No name, no address, just a stack of accusations. Abuse of power, file tampering, witness coercion, misconduct, and a final jab. Ethical issues with her aggressive methods. It was a clumsy frame job, but dangerous. She didn't need David to confirm it. She saw Sullivan's handiwork all over it. He and his allies had switched to attack mode, throwing punches blindly, hoping to land a hit. She stood alone in the hall, rereading the document, each charge bolder than the last. They wanted to silence her, discredit her, strip her badge before she could expose their filth. And they were close to succeeding. The courthouse vibe had shifted. No more nods of respect, just sideways glances, whispers, doubt. They didn't know the truth, but Sullivan did, and he was milking the quiet before the storm. Elizabeth glided through the building like a shadow. She wasn't sidelined yet, but the message was clear. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Don't rock the boat. She passed Sullivan that morning. He lounged by the coffee cart, sipping like he was on a beach, his grin too wide, his voice too loud. "Morning, Director," he drawled, smugness dripping. "Heard your name's making waves upstairs. Tough week?" Elizabeth stopped, locking eyes with him. "Savor it, Sullivan." "Oh, I am," he smirked. "Need help with that resignation form? Just holler." She didn't bite. She walked away, but her fury burned hot. In her office, she locked the door and sank into her chair. For a moment, she let the silence swallow her, heavy like smoke. Then, slowly, she pulled a silver flash drive from her filing cabinet's bottom drawer. This wasn't just a backup, it was her ace. Months of data, audio, video, time-stamped files, metadata. She'd built it in secret, off department servers, away from spies. She'd always known this day would come. She just didn't expect it to feel so isolating. She plugged it in, scanning the files one last time. The body cam footage Sullivan thought was gone. She had it, hidden in an unrelated training file's metadata. Deleted disciplinary memos. She had them, watermarked and backed by whistleblower emails. Officer Maria Lopez's testimony. Sullivan's ex-partner now living states away under a new name. She had that too, raw and truthful on video. She had everything to torch Sullivan. And now, she had to use it. She called David. "It's go time." "You sure?" he asked. "Once this goes public, no turning back." "I'm on the edge," she said. "He pushed me here. Now I push back." That afternoon, she booked a meeting with a federal oversight liaison she trusted to take it seriously. Handing over the flash drive, she saw his shock. "This is airtight," he said, skimming the files. "How long you been at this?" 8 months, solo. No one would greenlight it without tipping Sullivan off. He studied her, then nodded. "I'll fast-track this, but be careful, Elizabeth. If this leaks early—" "I don't leak," she said softly. "But I do finish what I start." She left, walking the long hall back to her office. It felt heavier now, like the system was closing in. Trusted allies felt like risks, but she didn't waver. That night, she didn't go home. She returned to the courthouse after hours, the marble floors silent. She sat in the courtroom gallery, staring at the bench where Sullivan had smirked. This room had buried so many truths behind badges and legalese, silenced so many in the name of process. She pulled out her phone, hit record. Her voice was steady, raw. "If you're seeing this, I didn't get to speak out. Sullivan tried to shut me down, and for a bit it worked. But silence doesn't hold when the truth's ready." She scanned the room. This place has buried people, twisted facts. Not this time. Sullivan thinks he's untouchable, that the system's his shield. But he is the system, and it's broken. She paused. "This isn't about payback. It's about duty. If I don't do this, the next woman they target might not stand tall when it's done." She saved the recording, sent it to David with one word: insurance. Then she walked out. The next morning, she skipped her office. She didn't need it. By 10 a.m., her evidence hit federal hands. By noon, Internal Affairs was scrambling to cover their failure. By 3 p.m., Sullivan was yanked from the courtroom mid-testimony. His face, gold. He thought it was a prank until he saw the federal badge, gleaming and real. His smirk vanished. They didn't cuff him, not yet. They let him out, quiet but firm, and the room knew. Whispers flew. He's finished. Elizabeth watched from a secure spot David had set up, not hiding, but needing air. The fallout was just starting, and she wasn't done. Headlines hit like lightning. Top cop hauled from court in federal probe. NYPD faces oversight firestorm. Sullivan scrutinized. Director Harper tied to expose. By morning, the city was buzzing. News cycles spun wild. Pundits argued. Activists spoke out. But the real gut punch was the video, not the escort out, not the testimony, but a shaky, grainy clip from a gallery seat. It caught everything. Sullivan's arrogance, his dismissive jabs, his attempt to bully Elizabeth in open court, and her response, cool, poised, unbreakable. That silent strength hit hardest, not a shout, just raw power. The clip went viral in an hour. Elizabeth watched it unfold from a tucked-away federal office downtown. David sat across from her, his coffee cold. "You broke the internet," he muttered, scrolling reactions. "I didn't do a thing," she said quietly. "He did." David spun the laptop toward her. "Read these. Comments. Messages. People see you, Elizabeth. They're not just watching Sullivan crash. They're watching you soar." But she didn't feel victorious. Not yet. The real fight was coming. With Sullivan sidelined, his allies scattered like roaches. Some went quiet, acting like they'd never backed him. Others got careless, paranoid. That's when names surfaced. Lieutenant Thompson, Deputy Chief Alvarez, Officer Michelle Carter, even a trusted internal affairs staffer, linked to a 6-year corruption chain. Cover-ups, buried complaints, vanished evidence, fake investigations. It was bigger than Sullivan, and Elizabeth had known it. Now, she had proof. With Oversight's backing, she formed a task force. Federal analysts, 2 out-of-state officers, and David as lead. Their goal wasn't just to wrap her work. It was to uproot every cop who'd let Sullivan run wild. For the first time in years, she had full power. She moved fast. Subpoenas, opened databases, old complaints re-examined. Every buried name resurfaced, lit up too bright to hide. But as she worked the system, the city stirred outside. Town halls packed community centers. Victims once silenced now spoke out. Lawyers pushed for retrials. Retired cops offered testimony about things they'd been forced to ignore. One was Officer Patricia Morgan, retired 5 years after 22 on the force. She met Elizabeth in a Southside diner, a quiet booth, coffee and nerves between them. "I knew Sullivan," Patricia said softly. "Not close, but enough. When he started, he was sharp, cocky, with eyes that said rules were optional." Elizabeth listened, jotting notes, letting her speak. "He hurt people, Director. Civilians, his own team, anyone who challenged him. I filed a verbal complaint once. My sergeant told me to drop it. Said Sullivan had high-up friends. I didn't push. Elizabeth met her eyes. Regret that? Patricia's voice broke. Every damn day. Elizabeth touched her hand gently. It's not too late. Tell your story now. The next day, Patricia's statement went on record, one of the first pieces in the NYPD's biggest internal review in decades. But Elizabeth wasn't just building a case, she was sparking a shift. She met advocacy groups, organizers, pastors, not to talk, to hear. In church basements and gyms, she listened to mothers' fears of flashing lights. Young men stopped thrice weekly for nothing but suspicion. She wrote it down, not as evidence, as truth. Data wasn't enough. Stories and pain mattered. To dismantle Sullivan's machine, she had to rewrite the department's soul. Not everyone cheered her on. Inside, pushback grew loud. Officers walked out when she entered meetings. Some sent veiled threats, anonymous emails, one saying, "Watch your back. You're making enemies." She printed it, taped it to her wall. Not a warning, but a badge. If truth bred enemies, she was on the right path. A week after Sullivan's exit, the department launched a civilian oversight board, a long-demanded move. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. A start. Sullivan stayed quiet, under federal scrutiny, but not yet arrested. He'd hired a shady cop-defending lawyer, tried calling old allies. Most ghosted him. Those who didn't landed on Elizabeth's radar. The real shock hit 2 days later. David called her to a secure room, face grim. Found something deep, an internal memo, sealed, 3 years old, signed by Deputy Chief Alvarez. He slid it over. A command green-lighting a covert task unit Sullivan handpicked, operating in high-risk areas with no oversight. No body cams, no logs, no complaints without supervisor approval. A ghost squad, untouchable. Elizabeth's blood ran cold. How many? 7 officers, David said. Sullivan ran it. 4 still active. She stared at the memo, jaw tight. This is a recipe for abuse. No, David said softly. It's a recipe for control. Elizabeth stood, grabbing the paper. The stakes had shifted. Sullivan wasn't a lone bad cop. He'd built an empire. And now, she had to raise it all. The file sat on Elizabeth's desk like a live grenade. 7 names, 1 chain of command, years of unchecked power hidden behind sealed orders. She didn't move for a minute, staring at the cover. Task Force 88, Strategic Enforcement Unit. The name sounded polished, like a cover for something rotten. David stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes scanning like he expected trouble. I've never seen this level of cover-up, he said. Not even when I was in. Elizabeth looked up. They handed Sullivan a crew with no rules. Let him play God, then turned a blind eye. They didn't turn away, David said. They signed off on it. She knew he was right. This wasn't a mistake. It was engineered by those who saw justice as optional, safety as selective, and Sullivan as their fix. That night, she didn't sleep. She rallied her team, every investigator still loyal, in a secure room, files spread like a war map. This is phase 2, she said, voice firm. Sullivan's just the start. This task force is the real beast. We're dragging it into the open, name by name. They dissected the 7 officers. Their roles, records, vanished complaints, arrests without footage, classified memos, all scarred with Sullivan's name. Officer James Reed, tied to a brutal housing raid, no follow-up. Detective Sarah Kim, linked to 5 no-knock warrants, 3 with no arrests. Sergeant Daniel Hayes led an op that hospitalized 2 teens. Case dropped for no evidence. Each file exposed a rogue system. Elizabeth didn't blink. At 3:47 a.m. she decided, no waiting for the department to self-correct. She'd go public. The next morning, she called a press conference. No previews, no leaks. Just her, ready to ignite. The courthouse steps were mobbed. Mics, cameras, protesters with signs. Some cheered her name, others jeered. Elizabeth strode to the podium, clutching the file, skipping pleasantries. "This report," she said, raising the folder, "lays bare a pattern of systemic abuse and cover-up in the NYPD. It exposes a secret task force, greenlit without oversight, shielded by silence." Reporters leaned in, pens stilled. Led by Sergeant Michael Sullivan, this unit operated without body cams or scrutiny, in communities begging for fairness. Instead of clarity, they got shadows. Gasps swept the crowd. A screen behind her flared. Redacted files, dates, blurred faces. Real. These aren't random acts. They're linked. Every ignored complaint, every dropped charge, every silenced cry, connected. She paused. "Today, I'm releasing this report. Every page, every file. No secrets, no barriers. The public deserves to know who patrols their streets and what's done in their name." Cameras flashed. A reporter yelled, "Director Harper, aren't you scared of backlash?" She stared into the lens. Number fear let this fester. Fear keeps silence alive, and I'm done with silence. The feed went live. By noon, it was national news. By evening, the mayor called an emergency meeting. By midnight, the DOJ launched an inquiry. But Elizabeth stayed locked in because Sullivan was too quiet. She knew his counterpunch was coming. It landed the next day, not in court, but in her inbox. An encrypted video, no sender. She clicked. Sullivan sat there, no uniform, no smirk, just panic in his eyes. "You think you've won," he said, voice cracking. "You think you're a hero," he leaned in, "but you don't know it all." A grainy parking garage video played. David meeting a suited man, cash exchanged. Elizabeth's stomach sank. "No," she whispered. The video cut off. Another file popped up. Screenshots, bank transfers, a tip tying David to a firm that scrubbed dirty cop records. It couldn't be true. She dialed him. "David, where are you?" Silence. "David." "I'm here," he said. "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" A beat. "I went undercover," he said. "Had to get close to the insiders. They were testing me. If I didn't play ball, I'd be cut off. That cash was a sting. Check with the feds." Her grip tightened. "You didn't tell me." "I couldn't," he said. "If you knew, it'd blow the op. I'm sorry." "And now?" she asked. "They know we're tight," he said. Elizabeth sat, heart pounding, hands shaking. Sullivan tried to break her trust, but he'd failed. She stood. "Then we outrun them. Move harder. Louder. No more games." She hung up, grabbed her coat, and left. No more warnings, no deals. Just war. The city felt different now. Subtle shifts, quieter roll calls, more eye contact on streets. Patrol cars eased through neighborhoods, lights softer, stance less aggressive. Change didn't storm in. It slipped in. Steady. Real. Elizabeth Harper was its heartbeat. Not on TV, not at podiums, but in windowless offices, unstreamed meetings, closed-door talks where reform lives or dies. She'd turned down 2 promotions, deputy commissioner offers, with a shiny title and office. She didn't want a desk. She wanted change. So she declined, firm but polite, and got back to work. She led the first community audit herself, pored over 200 use-of-force reports, reopened old cases, met survivors, listened. The media moved on. Sullivan's arrest was old news. But Elizabeth didn't forget, nor did the people. One morning, a letter appeared on her chair. No address, just folded paper. "I thought no one would hear me. You changed that. You showed me a voice matters. Thank you." No signature. She tucked it with the others. Dozens from mothers, teens, ex-cops, survivors, angry, Grateful, raw, they kept her going when the system pushed back, when threats whispered, when allies wavered. This wasn't about being right. It was about answering for the truth. Sullivan's trial was set for fall. His lawyers stalled, filed motions, but the evidence was crushing. Talk of a plea swirled. Elizabeth didn't care about his fate. He wasn't the prize. The system that birthed him, shielded him, armed him, that was her target. And the work was far from done. Deputy Chief Alvarez quit quietly. Internal Affairs probed Task Force 88's links. 3 more officers were suspended. But deeper change stirred. In precincts, young cops asked new questions. Why this way? Who approved that? What if we don't report it? That was Elizabeth's win. Not in rules or cuffs, but in curiosity, unease, and the dawning truth that silence equals guilt. She spent weekends in neighborhoods officials avoided without guards, not out of duty, but to stay rooted. One Saturday, she joined a youth panel in Harlem. Bold teens fired tough questions. Why so long? Why didn't anyone stop him? Why trust you? She answered straight. Trust isn't handed out. It's earned, step by step. A 16-year-old girl approached after, silent, handing her a sticker. Silence ends with me. Elizabeth stuck it on her laptop the next day. That month, she was invited to a national policing reform summit. A big stage. She nearly passed, but thought of the girl, the letters, the waiting mothers. Alone under a spotlight, she told her story. No heroics, just a woman who wouldn't look away. She closed with, "Justice isn't about one man's punishment. It's about ensuring no one can become him." The room didn't cheer. It hushed, the kind of quiet that hits deep. Then they stood, not for perfection, but for her truth. Leaving, Elizabeth didn't feel triumphant, just tired, grounded. This was lasting change, slow, steady, built truth by truth. In a private interview later, someone asked if real change was possible. Yes, she said, but not from the top. It's every person who stops ignoring the truth. Her smile was soft, fierce, because it was never about Sullivan. It was about silence, and what happens when someone shatters it. This wasn't just one bad cop or one bold woman. It was bigger. The quiet havoc silence wreaks, and the raw power of standing tall when sitting's easier. Elizabeth Harper proved change doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's lonely nights, tough choices, and pushing on unseen. She didn't chase fame. She fought for strangers' safety. She showed justice isn't a snapshot. It's a grind, demanding guts, especially from those who've seen too much to fake blindness. To every viewer, especially elders who've endured broken vows and slow gains, here's your nudge. Your voice still counts. Your story has weight. Your wisdom isn't to hide. It's the bedrock for the next generation. If this hit you, stirred a memory, or struck a chord, don't hold it in. Share it. Talk it up. Pass it to someone who needs to know the fight's alive and worth it. If you believe in truth's power, in accountability, in stories that hit hard, like this video, subscribe and hit the bell. You won't miss the next one. Because sometimes, the real twist isn't what happens. It's who we become when we rise.